Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is Sarah Birnbach, and she is an award-winning writer based outside of Washington, D.C., who began her career as a nonfiction writer in 2016 after successful careers as a human resources management consultant and family therapist in juvenile court. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we're here to talk about the book you've written and your response to your father's death. So if you'd like to kind of just start off with that story, that'd be great.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, Christine. My memoir is called A Daughter's Kaddish, A Year of Grief, Devotion, and Healing. And it was informed by my journal entries. I've been a woman who journals since my teenage years. And during the year after my father's death in 2000, I journaled every day, which is not typical for me, but I had a lot to say on the page. And I began taking some classes in how to write essays, and one of the instructors said to me, "Well, you should take all these chapters and make them into a book." I had never aspired to write a book before that. And so she motivated me. She helped me with some edits, and I put together journal entries into a narrative. And my story was published in 2022.
So tell us a bit about, for our listeners who aren't familiar with the Jewish faith and the traditions, what is a Kaddish? What does that mean? What is it for? Who does it?
A Kaddish is a prayer, and in Jewish services, there are multiple Kaddishes. They break up parts of the service. But the mourner's Kaddish is a prayer that extols God. It is, even though it is said by mourners, there is no reference to grief, there's no reference to mourning. It is a prayer of acknowledging God's goodness. And the reason it has become the mourner's Kaddish is because when we're grieving, we often are angry at God, or we don't understand why our loved one has been taken from us. And so by reciting this prayer, we are reminded that there are good things, that God has many good things in the world, that we really do have blessings to be grateful for, even though one of our blessings has been taken from us. The Mourner's Kaddish is traditionally, historically, recited every morning and every evening in synagogue for 11 months. And the reason for this, God's judgment stage is believed to be 12 months. Now, if someone is an evil person, obviously they're going to need God's blessings for as long as possible. Now, for people who are good, as my father was, we don't want God to think they're amongst the evil people that need 12 months worth of God's judgment. So we shortchange the time in which we recite the Mourner's Kaddish. We recite it for 11 months so that God won't think our good person is amongst the evil. And I'm using the word evil loosely. We don't want God to think that our loved one needs 12 months of God's judgment. So we recite it every morning and every evening. When I was reciting the Mourner's Kaddish, I was traveling extensively for my work. And so I had to find a prayer service every morning and every evening in every city that I was working in. This became a challenge because we didn't have cell phones then, we didn't have GPS, and not only did I have to find a synagogue with a morning and an evening prayer service, but then I had to figure out how to get there, and that was challenging. I found a book by a man named Israelowitz, The Jewish Guide to the United States, and it lists every state, then every city alphabetically. And within each city, it lists all the different synagogues. And I would get on the phone and I would call the synagogue and say, "Do you have a morning and an evening prayer service?" Often they did not, except on the Sabbath.
Okay.
And I would keep calling till I found a place to recite the Mourner's Kaddish.
Wow, that is dedication. One thing I read in your story is that this is usually something that's done by men and not women. So tell us about that.
Judaism, like many religions, is historically a patriarchal religion, and it is considered the obligation of the son. My father didn't have any sons. He had 3 daughters. And when my father was grieving for his father, he asked me if I would hire a man to recite the Kaddish for him when he died. And it happened to have been my 21st birthday. I thought my father was gonna say, "Happy birthday. I'm sorry we can't celebrate. I'm grieving for my father." But instead, he said, "When I die, I would like you to hire a man to say the Kaddish for me." I was so caught off guard. I said, okay, Dad, sure." Well, 23 years later, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And by that time, I had 2 children. I had participated in their religious school education. I had learned how to read the Hebrew alphabet, and I no longer felt that I could hire a man, a stranger, to recite this prayer for my father. I felt that my voice would be the more powerful voice, that God would hear me in a different way than he would hear a stranger. So my father's father had been Orthodox, and so my father had been brought up with an Orthodox father and a feminist daughter. So here was my father caught in this vice between being raised in a traditional way and his daughter wanting to recite this prayer for him. So I approached him with every argument I could think of, that Judaism is a religion of actions. Yes, we have our beliefs, but unless we are putting our beliefs into actions and demonstrating our values in behaviors, then just having a belief isn't sufficient. That was one argument. The other argument was, God's going to listen to me, Dad, better than a stranger who doesn't even know you. My prayers will have much more passion than the prayers of a stranger. I don't know that I ever truly convinced my father, but in the Thanksgiving, in the year before he died, just about 9 months before he died, he gave me his blessing.
Hmm.
And I recited the Mourner's Kaddish for him. And my story shares experiences that I had where sometimes there were 9 men and me, and they wouldn't say Kaddish. The Kaddish is supposed to be recited in a minyan, a quorum. The Hebrew word is minyan, but what we would think of in English is a quorum of 10 people. And the reason that we say it in the presence of 10 people is so that the mourner is not alone. So the mourner is surrounded with community and people who understand the grief process. And even if a person in a minyan hasn't lost a loved one, they understand why the mourner is there. So it takes 10 people to be able to recite the Kaddish. There were times on my travels that people put a minyan together for me, and there were other times where there would be 9 men and me, or 9 men and 2 women, and we were prohibited from saying the Kaddish.
Hmm. So how did you respond in that to keep up with your twice a day? I mean, how did you do it?
I said it silently to myself.
Okay. Well,
I just figured, God hears me,
yeah.
and if the leader of the service, many times a rabbi, sometimes a lay leader, if they're not going to recite the blessing, I'm just going to recite it very quietly in a whisper, so God will hear me. I
Yes.
believe God heard me.
Well, I would imagine. I would imagine he doesn't need to actually vocalize, but that's just fun.
Right? Right.
Different belief systems, I suppose. I know when I was a kid, I was raised Catholic, but when I was a kid, I would pray before dinner, and I'd often do it very quietly or in my head and think, "Okay, I can do this." Whatever. I don't need anybody else focusing on me and whatever. So I get it. I get it, and I kind of like to think he heard me. I don't know. We'll see.
I
So
believe God hears us no
I,
matter.
I do too. I do too. I really do. So now I know you also had an incident with your daughter had an accident. Is that right?
I live on the East Coast, as you mentioned. My daughter was in school in California, and she was in a near fatal car accident. And I was at work in my office in the juvenile court where I was a family therapist. And I got a phone call from a doctor in the Barstow, California hospital telling me that they were putting my daughter in for a CT scan of her brain to make sure there was no brain bleed and that she had been cut out of a car.
Mm.
And I didn't even go home. I just raced to the nearest airport, which is Dulles International Airport, got on the first plane to California, and all I had with me was my prayer shawl and the bag in which I keep it, my journal, and my purse. And I flew to California, and the rabbi, who coincidentally was a female rabbi, so I didn't have to worry about any gender bias, she put together minions for me at the Hillel. And what I didn't know at the time was that it was exam week, and professors came out of their classrooms, left their students under the honor system, and came and formed a minion so that I could say the mourner's Kaddish. And what was the most profound thing for me of all was that men and women came up to me and said, "Whatever you need." One man offered to lend me his car. Another professor came up to me and said, "If you need clothes, you're about my wife's size. I'm sure we could lend you anything you need." Someone invited me to stay in their home. These are people who were total strangers to me. And here they were. They knew that I was grieving, and they came together as a community, and they offered me everything that I would have needed. Now, I chose to stay in the dormitory with my daughter, so I declined offers of housing and meals and a car, but I did accept toiletries and I did accept some food. Um, but in Judaism, this is one of the beauties of the minyan, the group of people who form a community to pray with a person who is grieving. And when I thanked the rabbi there for putting together this minyan and thanked the people, they thanked me for
Mm.
giving them the opportunity to do what we call a mitzvah. Now, mitzvah translates to commandment, but we think of it as a good deed. The literal translation is commandment. They thanked me for allowing them to do a good deed, and I was so blown away by that. It was a transformative moment for me.
Yeah, I would imagine it's also an honor to them to be able to participate and be able to be part of that ritual as well. I mean, I know in many cultural traditions, someone being involved in something like that is considered an honor, not just, something they're doing with a favor, but something they're like, "Oh, thank you so much for letting me be part of this very meaningful event." So I can understand that.
And I think that the beauty of this particular ritual in Judaism is that when someone knows that there's a mourner in their midst, it doesn't scare them away. It
Yeah.
propels them forward to help a mourner.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started recording about how some people are just so very uncomfortable discussing grief and how we all are gonna get there at some point in time. We're gonna lose someone, and none of us are getting out of this alive ourselves. So it's kind of, we should
Right.
really, become more comfortable with it because it's there. So was your daughter okay? Did she survive that okay?
Yes, she has survived. She had stitches in numerous places on her eyebrows. She has some stitches in the forehead, but over time they've diminished. But thank you for asking. Yes, she is fine. She survived. The
Excellent.
car, not so good.
Well, that's the car did its job. This is
Place.
with
Right.
that,
Absolutely.
I completely understand that. It's like when all of my kids got their first car, it's always like, "How safe is the car?" 'Cause something happens, I want you to be
Right.
okay. I don't care about the car. But so, I mean, you said it was all the journaling that you wanted to put together for your book when you started writing it, but was it kind of there's purpose behind it? You wanted to write it for other people to really kind of understand what was going on, or what was your thinking there?
My motive for writing the book or trying to get it published.
Yes.
In the beginning, I was just writing for my own benefit. What I know about journaling is that we write it in the moment and then we have the opportunity to go back and relive what we experienced.
Right.
And so what I originally started to do was just reread the journals and transcribe them because I write in longhand. When this instructor suggested I write a book, at first I was like, me really? But then I thought two things, two reasons. First of all, I wanted to encourage more women to undertake reciting Kaddish. And even if you don't do it twice a day, every day like I did, even if you only do it on the Sabbath, when you stand to recite the Kaddish, everybody knows why you're there. And
Mhm.
one of the beautiful things, and there is a story in my book about this gentleman, Ralph, who was reciting Kaddish for the 60th anniversary of his father's death. No matter how long ago the death was, everybody knows why you're there. And nobody in a minion says to you, you're not over it yet?
Uh,
Or aren't you past it? Or it's been that long and you're still crying? Nobody in the minion says that because this man was crying and it was 60 years since his father had died.
mhm.
And nobody looks at him askance. So the first reason was to encourage more people to recite the Kaddish when they're grieving. And it doesn't matter if it's the first 11 months or it's the anniversary of the death. Grief has no expiration date,
True.
and grief is not linear. You can feel fine one morning and go to the grocery store and see your loved one's favorite cookie or favorite meal or favorite fruit, and all of a sudden the grief overtakes you. So it's not linear. The other reason was I wanted to encourage more rabbis and lay leaders to encourage women to recite the Kaddish. Because given that Judaism is, like many others, a patriarchal religion, in more orthodox synagogues, women haven't been encouraged to say Kaddish. They've been told, like I was, find a man to say it for you. And so, and I also, my third purpose was to educate people about Jewish mourning rituals
Mhm.
because we have a lot of intermarried couples where one partner is Jewish and one partner may not be, or one person may be a more observant Jew and one person may be a secular Jew. And until you have a loss, you don't know what these rituals are or how they can be helpful. So I also wanted to educate people. Um,
Yeah.
these are our rituals. These are how they can help you. These are how I don't believe we ever completely heal from grief, but these are how you can help find some kind of new normal.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that, and when you were talking about how different things come up, I know I call those pockets of grief, where it's kinda like not just the cookie in the store, but o obviously a holiday or a birthday or some kind of an anniversary
Mhm.
you find or
Yep.
something that just brings back those memories, and sometimes they're almost as fresh as they were however many years ago. So I think that's important for people to recognize it, that it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're wallowing in it or whatever term you want to use. It's just a normal part of how our brain works when it comes to creating. So the people who would read your book would be people who want to learn more about the Jewish faith and mourning or just mourning in general. I mean, what could someone get out of your book by just reading it in general?
I have had people who are not Jewish tell me they've gotten a lot out of the story because they've learned that grief isn't linear. They may have known that at some intuitive level, but seeing it in writing
Right.
helps them. A couple of people have told me that my story about what happened to me in the grocery store, I happened, I never go down the cookie aisle. We don't buy cookies in this household, but all the other aisles were congested and I was in a hurry. So I went down the cookie aisle and there was my father's favorite cookie, which happened to be Mallomars, on the shelf in a bright yellow box. And I just started crying in the middle of the supermarket and I couldn't stop. And a lady came over to me and said, ma'am, are you okay? And so even if readers aren't Jewish, it gives them permission
Mhm.
to to express their emotions even after the fact, even after a wake or even after a funeral or even after the first Christmas or Mother's Day or Father's Day.
Yeah.
Grief doesn't expire. And so I hope my book will appeal to all writers,
Mhm.
excuse me, all readers, um, because, like you said, none of us get out of this
Mhm.
alive. And the longer we live, the more funerals we will attend and the more grief we will experience. So there are, I hope, in my book, enough stories about grief in general to appeal to a broader audience.
Right. Well, that's you reminded me when my grandmother was getting quite elderly, she would read the obituaries every morning to see if anybody's name was in there that she knew, and I was like, "Grandma, why?" But to her,
Yeah,
every now and again, be like, "Oh, so and so," or something. That was kind of her way of keeping track of, who might not be around anymore, which I always thought was kind of morbid. But as I've gotten older, I was like, I get that, especially in the day before the internet and all that kind of stuff. Where
before Facebook posted all these deaths, right? That's
exactly.
how people learned who had died and who had passed away.
Exactly, exactly. So what have you got, planned in for the future? Another book planned? Another what are you thinking?
I have finished the first draft of my next book.
Okay.
The book is about my father's frontline infantry experience as a Jewish soldier in Germany in World War II.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, my father, like most soldiers, infantry soldiers, never talked about the war, and infantry soldiers were not allowed to keep diaries or any kinds of notes, and their letters were all censored. So I spent 2 years researching, and I have been to, Germany and retraced every single one of his footsteps through where he joined, um, his unit
Mhm.
in Europe to where he sailed home from Europe at the end of 1945.
That
And, I've just submitted it to an editor, I've gotten her feedback, and now I'm working on rewrites and edits.
yes, yes, that's always the fun part, but that sounds fascinating, especially I would think, I mean, my father was a big World War II buff, and it was, he was all he knew all about all the different places and the names and the whatever. He was the places where wars happened and so on. He was or battles, I should say, very into that. And yet, he was looking at it from the aspect of not necessarily the Jewish aspect, but it was the humanity for him. But I can imagine being a Jewish person in that environment, how much more. I don't even know what word I want to use there. Traumatic, it would be for him to see this. It's people in his religion that are being persecuted in such a horrific way. I would imagine. Yeah, like I said.
Not only that, Christine, but, every infantry soldier was at risk of being either captured or killed, but my father's risk was a little bit greater because if he'd been captured, he would not have been put in a prisoner of war camp. He would have either been killed or sent to a concentration camp. So the risks for and he was the only Jewish soldier in his company, and
Okay.
he did experience some anti-Semitism from soldiers that he was fighting with, not only against. So, there are many books written by veterans of World War II,
Mhm.
but I have yet to find many written by Jewish soldiers.
Ah, sounds fascinating.
So I'm telling my father's story.
I love it. I love it. Well, is there anything else, Sarah, that you would like to share with us before we end today?
I would like to just mention Shiva, which are the 7 days after the funeral, because it's very different from awake. Um, and typically you have awake before you have the funeral. In Judaism, we bury right away. The reason for that is we don't embalm. And so after the funeral, the mourners, and mourners are considered the children, the parents, or the spouse. There might be other grievers, but those are considered the mourners. They sit Shiva, which means they stay at home for 7 days, and they sit on low stools or on a couch that has the cushions removed to symbolize that they're brought low by their grief. And people come in and bring food. And the idea is that the mourners then have this time when they don't take care of any business. Um, they don't take care of their own meals. People do that for them. And that gives them, again, a community and a place in which to grieve and hear stories about their loved one or loved ones that people bring with them. Um, so I hope that my memoir will educate people about the process of Shiva because people may know a Jewish mourner and they may go to a home where Shiva is being observed and they may want to know, how do I go into a Shiva home? What do
Right.
I do? What is appropriate? Again, it's that educational component, but that's one ritual in Judaism that's vastly different than those religions that wait to bury their
Right.
loved ones.
Right.
So
Wow.
thank you for that opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you again for being my guest today. I love learning from my guests, and definitely, as I knew I would, have learned from you. So I really appreciate your time.
And Christine, thank you so much for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and to be on your podcast.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.